Morning, everybody. It's not quite true that I'm a North Islander. I'm actually born in Akaroa. So there we go. So I'm a supplanted South Islander up in the North Island with my family, who spent probably 10 years down in Invercargill as well. When I first entered my working career, my wife was a chemical engineer down at the smelter. So we enjoyed our time down in Invercargill.
Hold that mic a little bit higher.
I'll hold the mic a little higher. So I've been asked to speak about really some of my impressions as an acting chief executive about Nelson City, but I want to start in a slightly different place, and it's really about local government in New Zealand. And it's in an interesting place right now. A few years ago, back in 2014, a Colmar-Brunton survey was done of local government in New Zealand to find out how it scored reputation-wise with the public, with business, with councillors themselves, with staff. And to somewhat of a shock, I think, to the sector, the overall score of local government's reputation was 29 out of 100. And so, far too high, says some. That score and that time came fairly closely to the issues that came out of Kaipara District Council, that's up there in Northland. Back in about 2009, 10, 11, they were building a large sewage scheme. And the sewage scheme was supposed to cost $35 million to the people of Mangawhai and the Kaipara district, a small district. And I remember at the time speaking to the chief executive, who was Jack McKercher, quite an old style manager, chief executive with tweed and the whole works going on, and as mayor on several occasions trying to tell them, don't go ahead with this, do not do this, you need to review what's going on here. Well, they carried on, they didn't stop there. So they told their public that it was going to cost $35 million, then they told the public it was going to cost $43 million, and in the end they didn't tell the public that it was actually going to cost over $60 million. And that's what the bill finally emerged, over $60 million, with a 31% rate rise for the people right across Kaipara and a 700% rate rise for a lot of the people in Mangawhai itself. And that was one of those, in the last 10 years, one of those highlight moments for the public about local government. Across the border in the next area from Kaipara is Auckland Council. And the people I'm involved with the people in North Rodney who are wanting to de-amalgamate with Auckland Council, and simply for the fact that one size does not fit all. And for the people of North Rodney, who are 14,000 ratepayers in a rural area, certainly one city size or urban style of doing things does not suit all. In the urban areas of New Zealand, people are a lot more able to take their own decisions over their own things in their own areas. They're more local and more able to take local decisions. And of course, they pay a lot in transport right across Auckland, as you can appreciate. But in North Rodney, they don't see that money coming back into roads and sealing their still gravelled roads in that area. So they're currently in front of the Local Government Commission wanting to de-amalgamate, and I've been a part of that process. In fact, interestingly, they named me as their first chief executive if they would ever be successful in de-amalgamating from Auckland. So that's interesting, and there's going to be a public presentation soon of some research that was being done to show it can be viable. They can be a unitary authority doing regional council functions, even at that size of a council. And of course, they want to put in place a community board model similar to what I put in place on the Coromandel, which gets most decisions of most services back to local people in an organised sort of way, where they can actually find local solutions to how to do services. Down the road a little bit more in the next district from Auckland Council, In fact, Auckland Council, by the way, is a behemoth. You have a local board in Auckland Council that's over 300,000 people. It's not very local, and it's bigger than almost any other city council in New Zealand or Australia, just under one local board. And I was involved with Auckland Council about a year ago as an external advisor, trying to help them to sort out the issue with their local boards. But down the road, the next one is Waikato District. And Waikato District is probably one of the more central council models that I've experienced. And in Waikato District, I was invited over by the Resident and Ratepayer Association over to Raglan. Raglan, you can appreciate, is one of those communities who are out on the coast there and able to do a lot of things themselves. And of course, they're struggling with a council that's very top down and wants to do everything from the centre. One of the issues for Raglan when I was there is that the council is joining up in a shared service kind of arrangement for waters right across the Waikato District and Hamilton City and probably Waipa as well. And in Raglan, it was the community that found the water sources, that developed all of that knowledge. They did a lot of the early development of the water supply itself, and now we're faced with a situation where a council is going to just take all of that away and put it into a CCO, a waters CCO. Across the harbour from Waikato District is Coromandel, where I came in 2012 and was faced with two issues. One of them was a sports centre that went off the rails, and I remember signing, it was under construction, a memo for its construction. On the day I signed it, it was incorrectly calculated by $1 million. That led to staff consequences, which was serious for some staff members, but it also led to a review of what happened with that sports centre. The second issue was that we, in the Coromandel, before my coming up there, put in place 3 very, very world-class environmental wastewater systems, just like Kaipara had done. And the council of the day told the public that the 3 wastewater systems would cost the community $43 million. In actual fact, it cost the community over $90 million for those 3, and the community wasn't told about what that cost. It was an easy sell for the public because they thought that developers were going to pay for 2/3 of the water scheme, and that was what was told. In actual fact, as the development didn't happen on the Coromandel, and the GFC was part of the issue for that, more and more of that money had to get poured onto the ratepayer. So I remember in one year having to move $40 million worth of debt that was supposed to be paid by developers onto the ratepayers. Managed to do that in the year with only a 2.8% rate rise. And that was quite a challenge. Interestingly enough, the chief executive who made the decisions over those 3 water supplies was then called to go up into Kaipara and become the chief executive of Kaipara, where they had done exactly that over 1 water supply. And Coromandel was another Kaipara, but had never made the public, and also it was a more wealthy council, so it never really got out there in the same sort of a way. I'll finish my quick survey of everything in local government. I could go through every council. Next door to Coromandel is Western Bays District Council. And their Residents and Ratepayers Association came to visit me in 13 maybe. And part of the issue there, again, is another very central type of a council where everything gets done from a centre and doesn't really listen to the local communities. And their issue was that the council wanted to build a new library in their community. They didn't want one. They just did not want a new library. Their community was worried about debt, the debt of the council. They wanted the council to sort out the debt and just do a small upgrade of their library. And then later on, maybe we could have a look at it. The council wanted to give them a new library. So local government, when you ask why local government scores a reputation of 29 out of 100, Those are the things that are the headline grabbers everywhere. Of course, local government is also one of the most amazing places to work and to have a career in as well. But over that time, Local Government New Zealand, the organisation, has spent a lot of time trying to improve the performance of the sector. And I think it's quite an uphill battle. But they put in place excellence programs and the like to improve performance. And in fact, this council, Nelson, just went through an excellence program assessment and came out with a score of BB, which in the context of those who were the first movers on this wasn't a bad score. So last year, just to see how local government was going, they did another Colmar-Brunton poll of exactly the same of council reputation to see how they'd scored after all these years of working on it. And I guess they probably, with great anticipation, hoped that there'd been a big leap of public confidence in councils over that time with all the work they'd done. So back in 2014, the score was 29 out of 100 was the reputation for it. Anyone hesitant to guess what it might have been, how much might have risen or otherwise in 2016?
20,000.
The answer, and the chocolate fish goes right here, it dropped to 28 out of 100.
Is that cause for celebration?
Yeah, that's right. Cause for celebration, no. So local government, I'm not sure if everything was absolutely stunning and going well in local government, what its actual score would be. I suspect it wouldn't be massively high. And if you asked what line companies, how they scored, I suspect you'd get some interesting results there too. The one thing about local government is it's more accessible than your lines company or other people that the general public has basically given up on trying to do something about charges for lines or power or things like that. You just can't engage. They don't know how to engage and they can't engage, but in local government, for all its problems, you can engage. And this group knows that and is very effective in doing exactly that. So coming to Nelson City, just briefly, I was asked about my impressions and things I'm working on in the 6 months that I'm working here. I'd have to say one of the things I'm working on is the style of local government. Local government can be an incredible enabler of communities and of community engagement, of community organisations, of working with issues. It can be wonderful in that space if it gets its style right. And that's what I'm working on as one of the work-ons for the council, is to take it from something that is top-down and quite closed to something where the doors are open back for the dialogue and the engagement. Some of it really positive, some of it hard and chunky for us, but the council wrestles with all of those things. So I'm trying to get the council into the space of being a better partner. And for staff, when they start any project or program, I want to lodge a couple of questions in their mind before they start. One is, who are my partners? So the first thing, not assuming that the council will do everything, but asking, who are my partners? And the second thing I'm trying to get staff to do in that space is, what's the role of local government and why? Are we a direct service provider? Are we a partner? Are we a funder? Are we an advocate for others to do it? Or are we a facilitator using our skills to bring the parties together around the issue? And so I think that it's important that local government understands what its role is. Overall, it can facilitate incredible growth in a community, socially, culturally, and also economically and environmentally. If it gets the style of how it works right. Local government's called local government for a reason. And what the sector is challenged to do is actually get the local back into local government. So some of the areas where I'm working on as well in projects is, for instance, homelessness. What's the role of local government in homelessness? Well, we have a role. There are around about 100 local homeless people in Nelson, and that comes from a joint agency's officers themselves identifying that number when they're in my room, in my office. Local government is great as a facilitator and actually pulling the different parties together to understand what the issues are, what all of our knowledges are, and what we can each contribute to that. And that's a process that is underway. Another thing I'm trying to help the council with is what are local projects that can be dealt with more at a local level. When I first came, we had an instance where we did a cycleway out into Hunanui, which had started off consultation a number of years ago. Then it moved more into a staff professional environment, transport environment, and came out with very good professional staff advice. And when it came to the decision to go ahead with it, the gallery was full of people from Te Hunanui saying no, not the right thing, not the right route, not the right this, not the right that. What it was a moment for me to reflect on that is that we were doing the right thing, but we'd come up with an answer that was a no from the community that we were there to serve. And so what that led is a reshaping of that project back to the community to understand how and involve the community in what I might call co-design, actually working alongside, with our role not being necessarily the lead and saying how it's going to be, but actually genuine co-design between people and council and bring the parties together to actually get the right solution then coming forward. There will be a cycleway, but it will be one where the route and everything is understood by the community, it's inputted genuinely by the community, be one that they support going forward. And so one of the reflections is the model of Nelson City is what I might call a little conservative and a little top-down. And it's very central. It doesn't have wards and the like, which has got positives and it's got negatives. One of the negatives is that you have very strong communities in here in Stoke, Te Hunanui, Hera, and that type of an area. And a lot of projects which could well be, and even services which could be dealt with in those strong communities and growing them and their capabilities, are actually taken around the council table level. So the council table is being what I would call clogged with a lot of local projects that should be dealt with down at this level with the community first of all. And to try to get ourselves back to getting people in the right places and getting local involved in that is a little bit of a job, but there's there's a lot of willingness inside of the council to actually try to get the levels right in the right places. So we're on that journey, which is a good thing. Another one of the issues I'm currently working on with the council is the inner city. And there's a sense when we talk to the retailers and others that there's been a slow decline of the inner city, just this drift, a slow drift of the inner city. If I took it a step upwards, I'd say there's actually a drift of Nelson. And years ago you might have been very, very clear on Nelson and its role and its strengths and the like. At the moment, I'm not sure that's quite so clear around New Zealanders now than it used to be. So at one level we've been working on, okay, a new vision, what's that going to look like, where's Nelson going to position itself, what are its strengths, how can it play to its strengths. On the other, taking it down a level, looking at the importance of an inner city, and I've just done a review of 20 years worth of papers and research done on the inner city, and a lot of those projects have been in place and some haven't been. But overall what it does, that research does say for Nelson is that the inner city of Nelson is the strongest or the best urban asset of the whole of the top of the south. And it anchors the Nelson city itself. Nelson city, inner city, is not going to compete on high volume, low cost retail. That's not its position. The experience of the inner city of Nelson sets it apart from any other urban centre in the top of the south, including Richmond. They're never going to ever be able to compete to what Nelson inner city can and should be offering, which is a mix of culture, arts experience, foods, hospitality, and high quality retail. That mix in there gives it something that's unique inside of the inner city that can't be replicated anywhere else. So how do you take forward the inner city of Nelson in a way that anchors its position? Because where the inner city goes, I wouldn't say the rest of Nelson goes, that's not quite true, but it's certainly, if the inner city is going into decline, then the city's also moving into decline. So that's a project at the moment that we're working on, and it's probably going to come out in our 10-year plan about how we anchor that. At the moment, currently from our plans, I've seen, if I look at every line that's to deal with the inner city, there's probably 24 million being spent in the inner city over the next 10 years. But over the top of that isn't a sense of coordinated leadership, of vibrancy, of leadership from the council, of people who are working actively in the inner city as their focus and the like, and trying to build that up. Not just in terms of what I said, but in terms of also what makes it commercially viable to be in the inner city, and to understand that. How do council properties that we have in the inner city contribute to, with others, to actually growing more happening in the inner city, more value out of those properties? That's one of those big things that we're just sitting inside there. The other is growth, and it's an interesting debate around growth. And this is my last point I'll make, and then we'll take some questions. Growth in the Nelson and Tasman region is high. How high is it? Well, there's various ways of looking at this, but here in the inner city, here in Nelson City, we believe it's I think it's called medium plus. It's between medium and high. In Tasman District, they're calling that growth high. What that does do is how we see growth has big shifts in infrastructure. For instance, in the whole Southern Link debate, where business case comes up and says that there is a reason to do something for transport in the 2030s. If you're on a medium growth rate, that's where you project. If you're not, if you actually think it's a medium to high growth rate, that actually comes forward 10 years to deal with the traffic if you think it's going to be a high growth rate. So there's an interesting issue, and it's the same with other infrastructure around the city. Depending on how much you think it's growing will be the time frame you put on investing in your infrastructure. So as we come up to our 10-year plan, I'm looking at the weightings of how much investment we put into arts, culture, heritage and the like, versus how much we're putting into infrastructure for growth, versus how much we're putting into the inner city. And it's interesting just to see the blocks of how councils are planning to do that and how it's done it in the past. My sense is that council has invested heavily in arts, culture type of infrastructure, buildings, groups, and the like, as if you like, front-loaded its investment quite heavily in that space. And in future, it's going to have quite an investment gap between growth and how much it can afford to pay for in infrastructure. So it is some interesting strategic debates coming forward with the council. The council has an annual cap on how much rates it can charge. At the moment, we're charging out there around about $67 million worth in rates, which is about 60% of our overall revenue for the council. And we have a cap which is around about 4%, which is something like 2% or inflation-related 2% plus some proxy for growth. It's around about 4%. If you have a look at what we can invest, there are some things that we can't change, which are interest, depreciation, and staff salary rises. So those three are almost like they eat into that 4% before you go anywhere. So left above that, above what that might be, is a certain amount of investment for anything that might be new. And so it doesn't leave a lot. It leaves potentially around about 2% for anything new you're wanting to do, either in the inner city or in arts recreation or the like, etc. It leaves a margin of about that much. 1% of rates in this city is around about 650,000. So it's interesting, we're coming into some of the most chunky parts of our long-term plan with workshops starting with council in December, and we're going to have to work on the balance of these types of things and also our vision for where we see Nelson in 10 years' time. And that's the overarching thing. Where are we going to be in 10 years' time? Where do we need to put the weight of that investment over 10 years' time? As a council, how do we see our role? And there, I've done. I've just run out.
Brilliant.
I've just run out of words. Thanks, guys. questions, I'm happy to take them on anything.
Well, I'll start. David, thank you for that. It's been great to have you here, it really has. Don't you think you've got to make mention of the fact that we've had an earthquake, a severe earthquake in Christchurch and along the east coast of the top of the south that has caused the Trafalgar Centre, the School of Music and the Suter Art Gallery to need this sort of capital expenditure on it. So that needs to be taken into account when you say that that's where our emphasis has been over the last few years. It's because of those seismic events. But anyway, your thoughts?
Okay, so the question or the comment from Mel was, hey, the earthquakes and stuff have actually generated a lot of the expenditure that we've taken on those facilities. Just want to acknowledge that and also say that we're in pretty good shape we've been doing a lot of resilience type of work. Can we cope with the big one when it comes through? I think we're in actually really good financial shape to be able to cope with that going forward. Yeah, good comments, thanks.
I've got a question for you.
Yep.
Given that the government can do it and Fletchers are hurting, why can't local bodies do the same as what the government did? Hold contractors to their tendered price. Fletchers have lost a bucket on the Justice Centre in Christchurch and the casino in Auckland through underquoting. Why can't local government do the same?
Local government can do the same. It depends on how you enter into your contracts. Sometimes you've got a balance between doing that and actually paying more in your contracts. In other words, if you take a reasonably hard line up the front, they actually build in the risk into the contract prices. So it's a little bit of a balance, and also it's a game on the contractor's part as well. They build risk into their pricing. Richard.
Yeah, I'm interested in the 4% of rates, it's 2% for inflation and 2% for growth. Now, I would have thought growth actually provides some revenue as well. Also, so you're basically building in a flabbiness and an inefficiency. So why would you have a target that's basically double inflation for increase in rates? If we look at, say, the central government again, they've managed to keep budgets at 0%. In fact, if you want an inflation increase in your departmental budget, you have to bid for that out of new funding. You get nothing out of for inflation. You have to deal with that within your existing budget. Why can't local councils do that?
Local councils can do that. I don't think the 4% is a bullseye. It's an upper level cap that the council has put on it. The drivers this year are going to be things like property revaluations have gone upwards. There's more depreciation of capital that we've taken on. So it's a whole number of costs that actually are there that will increase it before we even start. So the question is, can you then reduce that and take operational costs out of your organisation? That's the main way. I think that was done several years ago. A couple of million was taken out. Certainly this council is paying for that. For those couple of million that we're taking out. So it's a balance of pressures, and right now we're just going through that type of competing bid situation. If we wanted to do nothing different, then yes, it'll be very easy to actually maintain those budgets and do nothing different than what we're doing at the moment.
But it's just efficiency is why you're getting the 28%. It's not those big projects you talk about. It's
Yep.
patronising dismissal of rate concerns on a regular daily basis.
I would say that, I'd have to say that it is always a very delicate balance or difficult balance. Councils, I've been a chief executive for 9.5, coming up to 10 years over now 3 councils. Probably the averages of rate rises have been in Coromandel. We had negative rates rises for a couple of years, and that's because we entirely changed our system. Totally changed the system, at the same time did a restructure to support that. So we had a model that went and devolved 14 services back under local community boards. And that actually generated a lot of savings because there was a lot more local scrutiny over capital, and they found alternative methods for service delivery and the way that they might do contracts, mowing, cleaning, and a whole lot of things. They could actually reduce down levels of services in some areas, like how many public toilets do you really need, that Big Brother Council just couldn't do. And most of the rises that we've had in my time have been around about 2 to 4% probably maximum. The drivers are often capital related. You can only sort of hold back, expenditure you put into renewals and the like for so long, and then the sweating of the asset comes and bites you. So drivers have often been capital related. You can only hold back staffing numbers and the like for so long, and then you have to invest in some of those areas as well. You always also have the constant change of government regulations coming on you to drive things that you have to do, and you just can't necessarily incorporate all those within what you are currently doing. It's a complex matter, and I can see your smiles, but I think if you are inside the environment, both you'd be able to give great advice, and you'd also understand the situation a little better maybe. You can call the people.
Thanks, David. It's really interesting. I think you know from my continual information requests that we've got a real issue with the workshops that you're holding.
Yeah.
And I've got a copy of the Meetings Act and Standing Orders, 2 very good documents. Do either one of these apply to workshops?
At the moment, what I'm doing is I'm getting down some advice to the council shortly in a governance workshop, which will cover off on a number of things that we need some guidance on. One of them is the workshops and the openness of that. The second one is legoimas. Third one is members' interests and conflicts of interest, including conflicts of interest in decision making. If you put something in the paper saying you're anti-damned, are you disqualified from all of that sort of stuff? We're actually going to cover off in a workshop. Practice-wise across the country, workshops have been a reasonably sacrosanct area of local government, because not only does it allow a free and frank flow of information, it's also one of those places that you actually build relationships with the councillors. They are free and frank to give their views, and if that's all open now to the public, then it actually affects that dynamic quite a bit, including the team building dynamic of the councillors. That's important. But that's not necessarily the bottom line answer to that.
Well, what is the bottom line answer? Are these documents, these documents have any standing in a workshop? Yes or no?
The way that we're approaching it at the moment, and we're on a journey to how open we will be, we are starting to become more relaxed about workshops involving the public over some things. But it was interesting, one of the ones I just saw recently had a mix of what I might call open things, so we're happy with public, and closed things all intermingled in the same document. And I was reflecting on that and thinking, well, that's quite interesting. We certainly treat workshops very differently from meetings, and even in the way that we prepare the material is different. So in terms of a shift overnight from A to B, no, but in terms of are we on a journey and we are looking at this seriously, yes we are.
Sorry, Don. 2 points. One, I've got a letter from Nikki McDonald saying that the Meetings Act and the Standing Orders does not apply to workshops, so I'll answer my own question there.
Yep.
Also, the Ombudsman has already stated that having free and frank discussion is not a legitimate reason for holding a closed workshop, because we expect our councillors and elected representatives to be free and frank at all times, not only when no one is listening. And also, workshops have been described as reenactments. Oh, sorry, meetings have been described as reenactments of workshops, because in fact decisions might not have been made in name, but opinions have been formed. And at the meeting the other day, the Mayor asked for people to come to a consensus. Now, for me, consensus equals agreement, which equals decisions. So I think that you are cutting very close to the line and actually going against the democracy of the people and excluding people from workshops, and even having workshops as they are at the moment at all.
So you can understand that there is quite an issue in terms of workshops. It's more so here that I've experienced in Nelson than other places where that's not been an interest for other groups. And in workshops, there tends to be the intermingling between the free and frankers we're just talking about, but also legal, contract, people's names. It all mingles into that type of a conversation. And one of the issues might be that we are needing to be clear about what we consider is open or what we consider is closed for the right reasons, as you say. But we're on a journey.
In the absence of rules, administration are making up the rules as they go along, and it's ad hoc, and it's basically a kangaroo council process.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, you agree with it then? Workshops are a kangaroo council process.
No,
you make up the rules as you go along.
Yeah, what I think is that you've identified that they're outside of that meetings environment there, what you just said. Okay, so you're in an environment where there are not necessarily a lot of rules over workshops. So what I'm saying is that we're on a pathway to actually making some of those rules, and the first steps will be to get some more advice on it. Yeah.
I sort of want to pick up on the workshop thing again too.
Yeah.
And I guess you're talking about some of the benefits of having workshops and that.
Yeah.
Let me put one of the major issues against it,
Yep.
which is I think it takes away staff accountability, because by socialising all these issues amongst councillors, no one has responsibility at the end of the day because it gets blurred.
Yeah.
And so the whole accountability thing disappears. And I think staff quite like that. I think they like to be able to say, well, you were all involved, you were part of the decision. You're dragging your councillors down into the minutia of decision making when they should be actually acting at a governance level. So that's one of my issues.
Can I talk that one first, or are they both linked?
So the next one is linked as well.
Okay. Yeah.
And the other one is there is no contestability of the advice that staff are giving.
Yeah.
And quite often, and I can tell you now because I've been looking at the Waimea Dam very hard,
Yep.
and seeing some of the information that council has been given in workshops, and a lot of it is erroneous or biased or slanted to one point of view, and they are not getting the other view. And by the time it goes out to consultation, it's too late because everyone's formed their views and they've been well and truly indoctrinated. And I can give you some really specific examples about that where stuff has gone wrong. So I'd like to...
Okay.
Can you Tracy, that was supposed to be a question?
I'm asking for comment on it.
I can,
The only reason I say is people down the back can't hear what you're actually
Okay, so a précis on that would be that the use of workshops to is something that staff use to socialise issues, and if you like, to lead a conversation to a certain outcome, and they rather like that. It takes away accountability to the decision-making process, something like that. And also, the other part of what he was saying was erroneous advice. If I can address the first part of that, I think that there is a danger of turning a workshop into decision-making, and that's a clear no-no. The second thing is that I've been on a lot of boards, not just sort of council related, but a lot of boards. And I know that as board members, you are wanting to be reasonably efficient on your boards, and you want to have a good discussion. But what happens in a workshop is often there is a mountain of material that you really need to work through, etc. And you don't want to turn your board meeting into that type of environment where you're going for hours and hours and hours on discussing through, if you like, the background material and taking questions on that. So there is somewhere that's between openness and transparency and efficiency on a board meeting. We've had some of our council meetings have gone, I've been at one that's gone beyond 7 p.m. at night, starting in the morning. So
500 plus page agenda.
Yeah, so there is somewhere in there between transparency and efficiency, and I think that there's a lot of boards that we're on of various kinds where you understand those sort of board issues about governance. So I don't say we've got the entire answer right, because I've said that we're on a journey about thinking about this.
Okay. Sydney, you wanted to say something?
Thank you.
He'll repeat the question of you.
Yeah, excuse me, I've got a bit of a croaky voice, have to accept that. You spoke about housing.
Yeah.
We have seen the Mayor and Nick Smith tearing around with their special housing areas. The object originally was to provide new housing and housing that people could afford. Out of all those projects, there has not been a single piece of affordable housing. I've watched this carefully. I went away and I've had 65 years in the housing industry in many, many aspects. And I wrote up a document myself how you could solve a lot of these problems at the very bottom of the scale. I've met with your senior council officers who are all highly educated, discussed it with them, and they say, oh, we'll write to you. I get a letter from someone else who had never read that report, and I say never read it because of the comments they made. They had not read it, and I published that at my own cost. Cost me probably several thousands of dollars. And it was totally ignored at the top. Now, the problem you've got is you've got officers in there planning the next review of the district scheme, looking at the housing of the future. They'll come out with a scheme, then you've got to criticise it. Wouldn't it be far better to come along to people like this? In this room alone, there's hundreds of years experience in housing. Come along and say, hey, what's the problem? Talk to us first, then bulldoze in. Not have some guys, I've been insulted many times, the person's telling me, I am qualified, you're not. I sat in the council, city councillor for 33 years, I know a bit about it. I sat in the meeting once and a new planner showed up. He'd been on the staff about 6 months. He came into the meeting, I made a comment, and he tried to down me. Fair enough. He turned around and he said, I'm experienced, you're not. I said, I've been in the industry long before you were born. And I said, here you are telling me you're experienced because you've been to university. Sorry, I've spent my money, I've taken the risk, I've provided the cheap housing, low-cost housing. I've now given you a proposition which is viable at the very bottom ends, $50,000, $60,000 housing for those people you're talking about that are going nowhere with housing. And what do I get back? A letter written by someone who's never read the damn report. Sorry, but sorry you cop it, but that's what it is.
No. Hey, I've got probably a couple of responses to that one. One on the staff side, which I would say that anybody who gave you a response like that warrants an apology, because that's, in my view, not acceptable. There's something that I think in local government, which I call the god of professionalism, where people can raise themselves up to a level of believing that they are the ones who hold the expertise and the knowledge, and the community does not. That's not my way of approaching life, nor is it my way of encouraging staff to respond and behave. That's number one. Number two is that affordable housing, I think, is a massive issue for here in Nelson, as well as in Queenstown and a whole bunch of other places that we could name. The council has one of the players in there, so is Housing New Zealand, and so are others in terms of how we approach it. There is a meeting coming up early in January in, I think, Motueka. Rach, you might know. Of multiple agencies to try to get over the issue of affordable housing and who does what and what do we each contribute to it and how can we do that better. Do I think SHAs are the answer to affordable housing? No. I think they should have been, but I think they're not. Whether that is, those are things that are decisions that probably go back several years in terms of what was the driver. Was it to provide more housing stock, which somehow had trickled down and it would reduce the I don't know, versus was the goal to have affordable housing? I seem to sense that the goal was probably to increase housing stock as opposed to affordable housing. Do I think that's the right way forward? I think if the issue is affordable housing, then I think that a different approach is required to SHAs.
Thank you. One more and that's it. Way down the back. Go
The Waimea Dam, obviously we are out to consultation at the moment, and our key issue is not for Nelson City itself. We draw a line just around that, which is an unfortunate line because our districts are so related. But we have these lines at the moment. We don't need the Waimea Dam for water security and the like. That's my personal view. We've done a lot of work inside of our council, and the water being supplied by the Maitai is actually ample. with some investment of clarifiers and the like in future, granted, to supply us and also probably to supply the whole of Richmond in peak. So we know that. The issue that bothers us and is the one that we've largely gone out on is the impact on the economy from the drops of water take on the plains. So that's, if you're wanting to know what our key concern is, it's that. Because if you have a look at the reports that we've commissioned, and NRDA is somewhere in that equation of commissioning, but really it was mainly us, the impacts come back in the hundreds of millions of loss of money coming out of the region. And if you have a look at the people who cross the border each day and work, including the subbies and the workers, you can't actually draw a line around Tasman and say we won't be affected. So that's what the professional report that we have come back has told us. Now, bollocks, you say, but I'm not the person who can
cuts and
review that
allocations.
myself.
Cuts and allocations don't mean cuts and usage.
Cutting through the issues, that's the one that bothers us probably more, is the economic impact on Nelson than it is about the water supply issue from the Maitai or from the Waimea.
David, the President has told me I must ask Michael.
Yeah.
This is Michael Gibson, Brook Street, Brisbane. This
Yep.
is bringing a question away from policy down to personal issues. As the council, that is, we the people, own the land with Brook Sanctuary leases, will council officials be prepared to survey the inhabitants of the Upper Brook to assess the number of incidental poisonings resulting from the recent 3 drops of Pestlog 20R? Pestlog 20R is broken, which is class 6 poison that is absorbed through ingestion, contact and breathing. Now, we doubt that the Sanctuary Trust will be interested in acknowledging that their volunteer staff have been affected. The council could have prevented the poison drop through its resource management plan, but chose not to do so. It must therefore accept responsibility for the harm done to its sons. Now, if you wish to have the list of symptoms, I have it here and I can give it to you. If the meeting wishes to hear it, I can read it out.
No,
You're right.
So what is your question, Michael?
Read it.
No, what is your question to David?
My question is, we cannot get the health board or the primary health interested in the issue at all. Will the council help us?
Can I say that it's unlikely, and I'd say probably no. The reason is we are in no position to be able to definitively look at the issues of health and the like that we would say New Zealand has tax-funded organisations that are responsible for that. We have to take a lead over their advice. And I think anybody who puts a council's advice up against the Ministry of Health and others, I think one thing, it will be a duplication of responsibility, and secondly, we're not skilled up to do that stuff. That's what the Ministry of Health and DHBs are there for. So we have to take their lead on that.